All right, very good. Well, thank you for the invitation to join you again. Last time was actually, I think, last spring or summer, and at that time we were talking about the concepts of near vertical incident skywave, and since then you've had a lot of great presentations. I've enjoyed a lot of them. So again, thank you to the organizers for getting all this done.
Hell of a team, I tell you.
Yeah, Dan told me that there were a lot of people talking about, how do we go about getting funding for a project? And I thought, well, I'm not an expert, but I have had some experience in this on both ends. So I thought, let's share it. Just for reference, I'm a retired CPA, long ago retired, and as a result, I ended up serving as treasurer for quite a few clubs and also some nonprofit organizations. So with that comes all the all the reporting and the soliciting and everything that goes with it. So what we're going to do today is just kind of talk about some of the options that we have. So let me go ahead and share my screen. How is that? Can everybody see that?
Yes, good.
No problem.
Okay, good. Now, of course, that I have this, I can't see the hands raised or Q&A or the chat or anything else. So if somebody will monitor that for me, feel good, great. Feel free to jump in and ask questions as we go along. Because if you're like me, you may forget them by the time we get to the end. Okay. Here we go. All right. The necessary disclaimer. My professional liability insurance was canceled along with my license years and years ago after I retired. So this is not accounting or legal advice. A lot of this, or that we're going to be talking about, you can do yourself. But if we get into, we're going to get a little bit into tax-exempt organizations and so on, you should make sure you have the necessary expertise, either volunteer or paid. This is pretty typical for a lot of ARES and similar types of organizations. You have limited internal funding. If you have, most of them don't have dues because they're not really clubs. I mean, ARES is a public service organization. You may have people chip in for their badges or hats or something else, but largely there's no real regular source of revenues. As the section managers know, the costs of ARES operations is usually not part of your section budget. You don't get to, chip in on that and then get reimbursed from the league. Many of the ARES groups around the country, despite this lack of regular money coming in, have ongoing expenses like everything simple like badges and hats and so on, to insurance if you're going to do a field day as a group, which by the way is a wonderful activity for any ARES or club because it helps the more experienced folks teach some of the newer folks the fineness of the fineries of setting up in the field and operating the equipment and so on. So these expenses are there and you have to deal with them. Now you may have some bigger projects than the ordinary day-to-day operations that you want to fund. You may we see groups putting up repeaters or extending the repeater system. Putting up mesh nodes has become very popular. Maybe you want to get a radio station at a served agency somewhere so that it's there and you don't have to set up from scratch when something happens. Maybe you need a cache of equipment that can be handed out during deployments, groups of handhelds. Maybe you want some sort of mobile asset like a communications trailer, a truck or van or something like that. There are these and many others are projects that typically exceed the financial resources that the ARES group has internally. So let's look at some possible funding sources. First one is the served agency budget. And we'll talk about each of these. And then you have possibly a served agency that's getting grant funds. You may have, if your agency isn't the local city or county, the city or county may have grants available. Look at possibility of sales of donated equipment. That can add not a huge amount, but a reasonable amount to your coffers. And then, importantly, grants from foundations and businesses. Now let's look about the served agency uh, budgets and grants. If you have a project that will improve your ability to serve the agency, that's in the agency's interest to help you find a way to make it happen. So if you understand what their what their budget cycle is, and you have champions within the agency, they may be able to help find funds for you from within their own budget. Many of those agencies also have their own fundraising arms. Often they will have a grant writing group because they go out for grants on a regular basis, often to maybe the federal government, like FEMA, for preparedness activities, or to other granting organizations. So they may be able to help you with preparing a grant that will result in producing equipment that will benefit your ability to serve your agency. Sometimes the agency may have an existing grant that they're working on. They may be able to include your project in that grant. So, they're often going through grants, multiple cycles. There may be one opportunity or more to fit your project into whatever grant activities they have going. So, and because they, by virtue of improving your ability to help them, are essentially a direct beneficiary of this project, they're generally going to be motivated if they have the means to help you make it happen. City and county grants. Enlightened cities and counties, and even those not so enlightened, sooner or later come to the realization that volunteer efforts can really help them to improve the community without necessarily impinging on their own workforce and the time and personnel limits that they have. Often volunteer efforts will improve livability and safety for underserved areas. Now, government units typically do have grant writers, so they may have the ability to identify grant opportunities and help you put something together. In addition to the operational folks you have within your within your served agencies, get to know your elected officials and remember that if they can help something happen that is a project that will benefit the community in one way or another, that's something that, I mean, if nothing else, they get a good photo op out of it and they get some good PR out of it. If they can help make that happen. And elected officials, particularly, you're looking at, county supervisors, city council members, and so on, even at the state level in some cases, they know where the resources are and what buttons to push to get people to help. I've tried, when I talk to local elected officials, to let them know, even if I'm not looking for something, in fact, it's best when you're not looking for something right away, to talk to them and let them know some of what your organization does, some of the services that you provide and have provided in the past, and offer to be a resource for them. If something comes up that involves disaster preparedness or disaster communication, say, hey, if you ever need somebody to just talk to you about this and help, be a knowledge resource for you, let us know. We'll be happy to try and help. So now you have a relationship where they build some confidence in you and your organization, even if you're not working with them directly. So you can offer yourself and your members as a policy resource or a technical resource that may be of value to them, and then they can help you. I mentioned sale of donated equipment. We'll often find that hams who have been very active at some point have to downsize. unfortunately, as many of our among our members age out, they have to move into a place where they can no longer, they can no longer have the station that they once had. And so they'll be looking to downsize. Now, in some cases, they'll just be selling the equipment on the open market, but sometimes they'll be willing to donate it, particularly if they have a long-standing relationship with your organization. If they've been a member, they some members may want to upgrade their equipment and be willing to donate that what they're replacing to the organization. If you have a member that's silent key, they may have be willing to put some of their equipment in their estate into the ARES organization that or similar group that they're members of. Families of local silent keys. I mean, we're running into this all the time. Unfortunately, I'm working on two simultaneously, and our director Dick Norton's working on another one where um, the ham passes away, and the family members really don't know what to do with the equipment. In some cases, they need help selling it, but in many cases, they're just looking to get it out of there. Gee, we've got tower sections, we've got rotators, we've got an existing antenna installation, we have all this equipment, amplifiers, and so on. If they're willing to donate that, and that may be particularly attractive if you are classified as a public charity where they get a donation, and we'll talk about that later. You could have a fair amount of equipment. Now that's not automatic cash in the bank. First you may decide that some of that equipment is best deployed among your members or as part of your overall service objective. But you may also sell some of it. I find that sometimes we'll sell things at a bit of a discount to market to members in our organization who happen to need it. You know what the equipment is. Now, this is time consuming, I'll tell you, because I try to check everything out, whether it's a radio, an amplifier, or piece of test equipment or whatever. I try and, to the extent of my ability, not being an engineer, put it through its paces. I know how it should work. I try to get the manual with it or download the manual so I can look at the various features and functions. And once I'm comfortable that it works, then we can go ahead and put it out there for sale, assuming we're not going to deploy it. But if and you may even want a little program where you talk to your members about, do you have some plan for your radio equipment once you are incapacitated or pass away, unable to use it? Do you have a list somewhere? Because I've seen situations where the widow just comes and says, just get it out of here, okay? I don't want to have to deal with it. And somebody takes it and makes a killing, and it could have garnered her potentially a tax deduction. It could have garnered them some cash if they really were in need of it. It could have helped the local amateur organization. So the time to at least raise that subject is early on, and not when it's already happened. To that end, I would encourage you to encourage your members to keep an inventory of what you have. We're really good at squirreling things away, and often we have things that somebody may not know the value of, or what it's there, why it's there, who it would be useful to, and having at least a list with details and approximate values could be a great help to your family and to whoever else is helping the estate. And it'll help you too as you sit down and take a look at things, particularly if you find you're going to have to downsize, or you're going to change your mode of operation or whatever. You can take a look at the list and think about who could use that and where it could go. Grants from foundations and businesses. This is a huge potential here. There are several things that you need to think about if you're going to approach some outside organization that does not have any relationship with you for funding for a project. First thing to know is, what are the overall objectives of a particular grant program or of the grant sponsor. Um, Many of them have a very specific range of activities, or more likely objectives, that they want met with their charitable money. And not all of those objectives will match well with the kinds of activities and projects that you have in mind, your group has in mind. So it's important to see, is this a good match? Is this something that matches the kinds of things we do? Are there people looking to improve, use their grant money to improve public safety, to improve readiness and preparedness, to assist maybe the local hospitals with their disaster readiness? You find matches like that between their objectives and what you're trying to accomplish. That can be a really good first step. Take a look at the qualifications. Often these organizations will not only talk about what it is they're looking to fund, what kinds of objectives they're looking to fund, but who is eligible to receive the grant. And in some cases, that will include a specific qualification that this be a nonprofit organization, not just a group of individuals, not just a club. And again, we'll talk about that in a little bit. Who will own the grant funded assets? If a city or county ends up purchasing these things or providing the funds to purchase them, often they will keep it as their ownership. You'll operate it, you'll help them set it up and get it installed, but it will remain theirs. What are the reporting requirements? A lot of grant money comes with some sort of obligation, and even if it's not formal, informally it's there. Once you get the money, you're expected to report back to the organization, not just to say, thank you, we're done, but here's how the project is going. Some of them may say, hey, we want a progress report every 3 months or 6 months or once a year, whatever it may be. I mean, this is sort of like when a student gets a scholarship. The granting organization is expecting to receive some sort of thank you and a little progress report, perhaps, from the grantee sometime, maybe within their first year of school that's funded or partially funded by the scholarship. Ask about employer matching funds. Many employers have funds that will match the charitable donations of an individual that works for them. But it's not always just a cash match. Sometimes they will match volunteer hours with their own funds at some specified rate. That's something that really many of your members may already work for somebody that has a program like that. If you're tracking your hours, you can submit those to your employer. Your employer ends up sending money to your ARES organization. We've had members do that, and it's, while it's not huge, but I mean, you get $300-400 a year, $400 or $500 there each year. That can add up, especially if you have multiple folks who are participating in those kinds of programs. So do ask about have your members ask about employer matching funds where they work, and especially if they are good about keeping hours. If you're keeping a record of hours, then sometimes the organization will say, well, please verify that this individual donated this many hours, and you can kind of check the records and see that that's reasonable, and then the funds come sometime later. Now, we've talked several times about being a public charity because, as I say, for example, that with a lot of foundations, either corporate or other, that's kind of one of the prices of entrance. It's an entry hurdle that, in their mind at least, weeds out people who just want money for something with organizations that are truly dedicated to public service and the public good. Having public charity status certainly enhances an organization's image. For nothing else, it says, hey, the IRS looked at this and concluded that their activities are worthy of donations from the public. And having that status encourages donations. And it will be allow you to apply for grants that you might not otherwise be eligible to apply for. Having public charity status may also enhance your ability to access public facilities and public programs. They may say, hey, we make this meeting room available for qualified public charities. And if you're just a group of folks, you say, well, we're ARES for the Amateur Aid Emergency Service, but you're just basically, as far as they look at you, a group of similarly minded folks without any real official status of any kind. They may not make those facilities available to you. Now, when you are tax exempt, there are a couple of qualifications, and these really have to, you have to mind these because they are at the core of what distinguishes a public charity from just a group of folks getting together to do a project. First, the revenues from this organization must not enrich the founders or the members. Something called private inurement, that you don't get to you don't get to just say, hey, a bunch of people donated this, so let's split it up among ourselves and have a good time and have a big party. You can't do that. If the organization ends up dissolving, it actually must be in the incorporating documents that any remaining assets will go to another charitable organization, so that they never end up getting distributed back to the people who started it or the people who are running it. You'll have to file some periodic reports with the Internal Revenue Service, with your state taxing authority, and probably with other organizations within your state government. And we'll talk a little about those. You'll have to keep accurate financial records because you're going to be doing some reporting. You need to track your revenues, your expenditures, and this doesn't have to be complicated, but you need to do it, and you need to have somebody who is responsible for keeping those records. As far as the IRS goes, there are several categories of exempt organization. You have the fraternal or social organization, 501c7. Now, this really didn't start out to be a part of the nonprofit group, but because they typically don't make money in any significance, the IRS really didn't know what else to do with them, so they threw in Section 501c7 as just kind of a catch-all, even though a fraternal or social organization isn't really the same in terms of objectives as some of the other that they do grant exempt status to. You have a public welfare, 501c4. Many clubs may fit this category. And then you have public charity and a private foundation, both of which are 501c3 organizations. The fraternal social organizations, it's easy to qualify for. There's not much you have to do. For general interest clubs, that's that's something that's fairly easy to get. Now, you don't necessarily have to file at all with the IRS. I mean, you're exempt usually by virtue of what you do, the flow of funds, and so on. But if you want documentation for a third party that you are an exempt organization, then you kind of have to go through this process. So most of your revenue may come from members. The donations to a 501c7, a fraternal or social organization, will not be deductible as charitable contributions. However, that doesn't mean it's not deductible perhaps to a local business who's willing to support you, or an agency that's willing to support you, as a deductible business expense. The public welfare organizations are designed to benefit the community in some way. This could be suitable for clubs that have a focus on public service. The requirements are not as rigorous as they are for a public charity. And again, though, donations are not tax deductible for the donor. Public charities, this is an organization that must be designed exclusively for charitable purposes. Um, there are specific provisions, as I mentioned earlier, that must be in your articles and bylaws, and you must provide the required record keeping and reporting. If you've been around and active for quite a while, and let's say you've incorporated because you want to provide some sort of liability protection in the way of insurance. Of course, the ARO club insurance is pretty good in this regard if you happen to fall under that. But you don't necessarily have the kind of protection that you need. You maybe want to open a bank account. The bank says, "Okay, fine. Show me the employer identification number," which is like a social security number, but for organizations. They have their what they call know your customer rules, and you want a bank account in the organization's name, you need to have an IRS number, and the only way you get that number is to apply. And by default, you're a for-profit corporation unless you can convince them that you're not. So this is sometimes what starts entities on the road of incorporating and then getting application for public charity, or either public charity or other 501c status. If you're a public charity, you have to pass a public support test. The difference between a private foundation and a public charity is that the private foundation may get the bulk of their resources from one or two sources, whereas a public charity must get generally on average at least a third of its revenues from the public. And the public can be members, it could be other charitable organizations, could be governments, and so on. If you are a public charity, donations are tax deductible for the donor. Now, private foundation, as I mentioned, it's very similar to the requirements for the public charity, except that they don't have to pass a public support test. If you have a foundation that formed when some wealthy patron or member passed away and left them a big chunk of money, and now they're going to administer that money for charitable purposes, but they don't go out and solicit the public in general for money, that often will become a private foundation. Now, donations to private foundations, just like charities, are tax deductible for the donor. One interesting feature of a private foundation is they typically have a mandatory minimum annual expenditure. They say you must spend X percent of your assets as of the beginning of the year during the following year. You must spend those on your charitable purposes. However, if you don't, there's going to be an excise tax that will take a big bite out of those assets. So private foundations are basically required to maintain their good status with the IRS to spend a certain portion of their available assets each year. And this will actually benefit you as an ARES organization if you run into some of those foundations, and we'll talk about a couple of them a little later. Now, before you file an application with the IRS, assuming you want to go ahead in that direction, first you need to file with your state for incorporation and have conformed copies of the organizing documents. You'll have to, if you're new, you'll have to kind of prepare some what's called pro forma, or looking forward financial statements, estimate of what you're going to be doing in terms of financial activity for the next several years. If you're not new, you'll need to prepare historical. Typically, I think you have to go back up to 5 years. And then you'll have to apply for a federal employer identification number. Okay. Then, if you're not seeking public charity status, you'll file on something called Form 1024 or 1024A. One's kind of a short version and one's a longer version. Normally, the exemption is retroactive if you're filed within 15 months of formation. Otherwise, if you have existed longer than that and you're just now filing, it will be typically effective on the date of filing, assuming the application is approved. If you're seeking public charity status, then there's a different form, the Form 1023 or Form 20, I think it's 1020, sorry, it should be 1023 EZ. And again, these things change over time. There are some efforts to get the Form EZ eliminated. I don't know whether those are going to be successful. There are some who say there's too little information that you have to provide on the EZ form, and so they're trying to get rid of it and go back to the old long form. Everything I've applied for, I've had several of them approved, uh, and they all were on the long form. And there's a lot of information there that you have to put together. For a public charity, the exemption is retroactive. If it's filed within 27 months of the time you were formed. Otherwise, just as in the case of a private foundation or other organization, it's effective on the date your filing is approved. And you will get what's called a determination letter from the IRS. That determination letter is gold. You want to make sure that you have copies, plenty of copies of that, keep the original in a safe place. If you go to apply for grant money somewhere, the first thing they'll do is say, are you a private foundation or public charity, whatever it may be? And you can say yes. They say, okay, send us a copy of your determination letter. That's what is going to be your ticket to participate in this grant application process. If your gross receipts average less than $5,000 a year and your organization meets the qualifications, you don't have to apply to the IRS for exempt status. But as I said, you may need to apply to the state because the state and IRS rules are sometimes different. And you may want to apply anyway just to get that determination letter. Again, I said earlier, you can be exempt without having a letter from the IRS to prove it, but that doesn't get you official listing with the IRS, and you really don't have any document that you can show a potential funding source. How long does this approval process take? I haven't done this for a while, but I had one that took 2 months, and that was our ARES Los Angeles group. And I filed two at the same time. The other one took over 5 months, and that was the Amateur Radio Antenna Defense Foundation, which we've since wound up. This one was basically a means to provide defense money for amateurs whose antenna systems were being challenged or prohibited contrary to the provisions of PRB1, and they were going to take it to court. The ARRL has a kind of a similar, or had a similar fund, but that really was only applicable generally at the appellate level, not at the initial court level, Superior Court or whatever it is. So we formed a foundation. And as I was explaining in the documents, basically, when you boil it down, our objective was to help provide funds for amateurs to sue their local jurisdictions to enforce the rights provided under federal regulation. And it took a lot of discussion and a lot of back and forth and a lot of explaining, but I got it approved. But it took a long time. I don't think the ARES groups are going to have nearly the kind of trouble. You'll probably be on the shorter end of the cycle simply because what you do is much more obviously for the public benefit and takes a lot less explaining. So how much does all this cost? That depends on how much work is done by, if you have knowledgeable members, attorneys, CPAs, and so on, or folks who will provide services on a pro bono basis. That'll help. The initial filing fee is anywhere from $275 to $600, and that could change year to year. The incorporation costs vary from state to state, but you'll have to allow at least several $100s if you're doing it yourself. If you're using professional services, that's usually going to be on an hourly basis, and you should find out before you start. The IRS estimates 60 to 100 hours for the record keeping and form completion in one of these applications. So when you look at those kinds of hours, and if you're looking at 3 digits of an hourly rate, you can see how that can add up pretty quickly. I did all of ours pro bono, and it worked out, but it's a lot of time. And again, you have to pay attention because what you put in there is going to be on record with the IRS for a long time. State tax authorities, like the IRS, the activities of a corporation or unincorporated association are taxable unless they are declared tax exempt. The state may issue your classification right away, but sometimes if they're unsure, like in the case of our ARES Los Angeles, when I applied to the Franchise Tax Board, which is the California State Taxing Authority, I got the public benefit corporation status, which is what they call it, right away, no problem at all. When I applied to the same entity for the Amateur Radio Antenna Defense Foundation, they looked at it and said, "Yeah, we're going to wait and see what the IRS has to say about this. We're not going to go out on a limb." And once the IRS approved it, they came back and said, "Yeah, okay, we can." We'll go along with that. But one tax authority's findings do not bind the other one. So you have to apply, and you have to make sure that you follow all the steps that they require, which it will guaranteed be different forms. It may also be different information or additional information. So again, you're getting into a lot of paperwork, a lot of research, a lot of reporting, but this is kind of the cost of playing in the game. Keeping good records. You need minutes of your corporate meetings. Very importantly, keep track of your gross receipts by source and purpose. If you if you say, well, we're going to hold a raffle, and we bring in $10,000 in the raffle, and we spent $6,000 on raffle prizes, so we're just going to report $4,000. No. You're going to report $10,000. Gross receipts means before deduction for any expenses. You'll have to keep track of your expenditures by purpose and what they're for. You don't need a really big fancy accounting system. I've been able to keep most of the records we need on simple spreadsheets, but and summarize that information. But it's all traceable. I can go back to specific deposits, specific checks. I know what they're for. I can summarize it to a point that we can give a clear financial picture to whoever we're reporting to. By the way, I mentioned raffles a little earlier. This is something that you kind of have to be careful of, at least here in California and possibly in other states as well. Long ago, there used to be these kind of so-called charities pop up, and they would be running raffles for some worthy purpose. And you find out that the bulk of the money goes to salaries and fundraising and so on, and very little actually trickles down to the actual intended beneficiary or public purpose. And in the case of California, the Department of Justice formed under the Attorney General's office, formed what's called the Registry of Charitable Trusts. And they existed to receive specific reports from the entities that were declared as tax-exempt organizations to see that they're staying within certain bounds. And if you are holding raffles and so on, they have rules about what can be done with the proceeds. And sometimes those rules can be pretty onerous and say, 95% of your 90% of your proceeds must go to charitable purposes. That means you can't use, in our earlier example, you can't take $10,000, spend $6,000 of it on raffle prizes, and $4,000, is available for your charitable purposes. No, you can't. That $4,000 is not sufficient to meet that 95% test. So if you have to buy prizes, and this is some big conventions. I see this. They'll buy a bunch of radios, they'll get donations, or they'll go 50-50 with the manufacturer or with a big distributor, and they'll spend a lot of money on these prizes. uh, if that's if that's coming from your raffle, the gross, or actually coming from any of your resources, that may throw you out of compliance. So be really careful. Same thing with what so-called 50-50 raffles at meetings. Everybody puts in a buck, and at the end, somebody wins half the pot. Uh, these can run afoul of regulations. Now, is your state Department of Justice going to come clamping down on you if you do this? Yeah, probably not. But again, because of the earlier abuses in California here, the laws are written to be intentionally vague, such that if they want to come after you for it, they can. So that doesn't mean they're necessarily going to, but they can. And usually these raffles and so on will engender additional specific reporting, and that can be a real nightmare. So just be careful. Know what your rules are in your state, in your city, in your county, and make sure that you're complying with those. And you may have to adjust your fundraising related activities accordingly. Um, you have to, this very simple accounting 101 is, you perform some regular reconciliations. What was your beginning fund balance? And typically for a year, let's say, if it's a reporting period, you'll add your gross receipts, you'll subtract your expenditures. That should equal the fund balance at the end. You'd be surprised how many organizations don't follow that simple formula and keep track of it. I mean, I've been to clubs where the treasurer reports, well, we have this much in the bank, or we have this much in the bank, but they don't say, here's what we started with, here's what we took in, and from where, here's what we spent and on what, and here's the difference, and that agrees with the records we have showing what's in the bank and any cash on hand and other assets and so on. So uh, again, it seems simple, but I'm surprised constantly at how many clubs don't do it. Periodic reporting to the IRS. If your average annual gross receipts are below $50,000, it used to be 25, they raised it now, and then again, that may change from year to year, so you always have to keep an eye on what the rules are. Then you get to file what's called a Form 990N, which is basically an electronic postcard. If you have your gross receipts and a few other things, you'll be able, bits of information, you'll be able to fill that out in a few minutes. It's a very simple thing. If your annual gross receipts, your average gross receipts are over 50,000, and that average, by the way, is I think over the last 3 years. So if you sponsor a big, clubs that sponsor a big convention, or you get a windfall of revenue at some point, that can throw you over that 50,000 amount. Then you have a 990 EZ, and if they're over another threshold, then you have an even longer form. But the 990 EZ is fairly voluminous in its own. And these must be filed by the IRS deadline. I think you can get some extensions on them, but the typical deadline is 4.5 months after the close of your year, which would put it around May 15th. I have in my calendar for all the organizations I'm treasurer for to make sure this stuff gets done. I keep actually a little record of when everything is due. If your organization sells a significant amount of donated property, there may be additional reporting required, and there's a form for that, of course. If you have significant unrelated business taxable income, which most of your ARES folks won't, but some charities do. They may run a thrift store or some other unrelated activity, and that could trigger additional reporting and potentially some tax obligations. So, if you don't say, hey, we'll run this side business, benefactor left us a hotel, we'll run it as a hotel, and we'll use that as our gross receipts, but that may result in UBTI taxes. So your average gross receipts is from all sources, and as I mentioned earlier, you don't get to offset the cost. So dues, banquet tickets, raffle sales, sale of equipment, that's all part of your gross receipts. For an established organization, it's a running 3-year average. There are some higher thresholds in the initial couple of years, so they cut you a little slack in your first year or two. Now, in addition to the feds, I mentioned there's annual reporting to your state. In our case, we have the Secretary of State. This is as a result of our incorporated status. We have to file a statement of information every 2 years. And that's so that they know, who are the officers and directors, who's the agent for public service, service of process. In the event somebody wants to sue you, all this stuff has to be part of the public record. And then you have the state tax authorities who often have similar, at least in California, it's a similar requirement to the feds in terms of a postcard versus a longer form, depending on the level of gross receipts. We have other you may have some annual filings with, for example, the Registry of Charitable Trusts in the case of California. Sometimes there'll be fees associated with these. Sometimes the fees are negligible or waived if you're below some gross revenue threshold. If you are going to have other people's money, whether it's from a grant or from other donations and so on, you should have a compliance officer. There should be somebody designated to keep track of this. Back about 6 or 7 years ago, the IRS had put out a reminder that, hey, any organization that fails to file even that little 990 yen electronic postcard for 3 years straight basically loses their tax-exempt status. And I know at least one research-oriented radio club in California here that did lose its tax-exempt status with the feds because the treasurer had passed away. The person who took it over was, handling the receipts and disbursements, but they didn't know about the reporting obligations. And so they went by the bystander. And now, it's going to be a big effort and cost to get it back. So play it safe, have somebody designated as a compliance officer, make sure they know what their reporting obligations are. Keep a compliance calendar, a date, due dates of all the reports to the IRS, various state agencies. Keep safe copies of all your IRS filings, your supporting documents, your correspondence. And I think it's a good idea to have somebody who is not the custodian of the funds kind of audit the books, just look through it, look over somebody's shoulder. Anybody who's keeping keeping the books and paying the bills and getting the checks in and a signature on the bank account, they should welcome a second party looking over their shoulder and or saying, hey, lay it all out for me, show me what's going on. They should be reporting to the membership, but they may want somebody just to make sure. I mean, I'd rather have somebody know for sure that I was not, cooking the books or taking some of the cash or something else. Interestingly, I took over as treasurer for one council of radio clubs many years ago, and the first thing I did was to do a reconciliation between all the records they had and what was in the bank accounts, and kind of say, okay, here's where we should be. And I realized that the reconciliation was off, but it was off because we had more money in the bank than the records showed. And I contacted the individual who had the position before me, and he said, I thought I was off some, so I just took it out of my pocket and put it in the bank. Well, it turns out he didn't have to do that because there were some mistakes in the record keeping. I mean, I applauded his honesty, and I got him a check and got him reimbursed so that he wasn't out any money. But it's potential that the other side of that could happen too. So it's a good idea to have somebody keep an eye on it. So that's it for the formal part of this. So let's go ahead and see if we have questions.
Okay.
Yes, there are.
There are.
Okay.
You mean everything wasn't crystal clear?
Well, some of these are interesting, so I think you'll enjoy trying to answer them. The Bill from Tennessee has a question about how an ARES group can be a 501c3 because ARES is a registered trademark and is owned by ARRL, which is already incorporated. he doesn't think ARRL allows sub-organizations to incorporate, hence they could not be 501c3 organizations. ARES groups can't be corporations, can they? Is there documentation that ARRL will allow this, or is it just that some ARES groups have simply incorporated on their own without ARRL knowledge?
In our case, I mean, I know our director knows about it, and I know because I've talked to other ARL directors about it, and I mean, we incorporated. It's been probably 15 years ago, and it's we call it. It's the name of the corporation is ARES LAX, comma Inc. Period. And so yes, the ARES is in there. But we exclusively carry out ARES activities. The league has not complained about it. At least several officials are aware of it. So I don't know. I haven't seen anywhere that you can't do it, and we did.
Okay. And then Dan from California says, is there a reason why ARRL has not lobbied for national charitable public service status for ARES with the annual combined federal campaign? Local ARES groups could do some pitches for their regional annual campaign books targeting federal employees, since most federal agencies have some EMA responsibilities in their area to provide when all else fails, comms, for their public-facing communications needs.
Very good question. I can't tell you why the ARL doesn't do that, but my best guess is that because ARES to them is not an organization, but rather an activity, and because those activities are conducted in the home states rather than nationally as a collective group, and because the ARL is already a 501c3 organization, and I believe they do take part in that federal campaign as a national organization. So they may simply not want to compete with themselves. But again, the league isn't looking at these because those are organizations that do incorporate or do seek funds. The league isn't necessarily in the position of taking responsibility for those because they are run and managed locally. I mean, if you look on our ARES Los Angeles corporate charter, the league is not on our board of directors, and the league is not does not hold any officerships of the corporation. So they don't really have the standing to do that. And again, I believe the combined federal campaign is something that the league, as a national organization, does already take part in.
Okay. Okay. Is there a template package for the Articles of Incorporation documents for an ARES type incorporation as a 501c3?
Yeah, there are, but it's going to first you have to incorporate. Remember, it's going to be based on state rules and regulations, and all the states may have something a little different. When I did this, I went to a book by a guy named Mancuso, published by Nolo Press, on forming a public charity in California. And they kind of walked you through the states and reminded you of the things that have to be in your articles and bylaws and the things that must not be in your articles and bylaws. And then they walk you through the forms and how those forms go. You may find a similar kind of publication in your state, but again, you may end up having to simply consult with a professional whose expertise is in this area.
I know in Florida there is a template package. So I've helped groups do that. So it varies from state to state. Okay, Chris from California says he's a high school teacher and he's gotten grants and stuff and equipment, and your presentation has taken him to a higher level, and he thanks you.
Oh, you're very welcome. And I should mention, by the way, that schools are one of those few types of entities that basically get automatic approval. There's really, if you're a school, or a church, there's not much question that public school or public church, you're not much question that you qualify. And so you don't need separate corporate status. This is why I was mentioning earlier that, for example, if let's say you have a club, radio club, that is trying to help set up a station at a school. Maybe they have a STEM program that you and your members have been supporting with advisories and lectures and so on, maybe some equipment, and they want to take it to the next step. They, as a school, as an exempt organization, can apply themselves to fund these things. So that can be a really easy sell.
Okay. And there was a comment about this all sounds complicated and for the average ARES volunteer or ARES group. That's why you have lawyers and CPAs to consult, because I don't think an average ARES volunteer or ARES group could do the paperwork to qualify for any of these. You definitely have to go through a professional.
Yeah, you have to gauge yourself whether whether you have the resources internally or whether you need to engage somebody. And I mean, you may find that I know a lot of the radio clubs that I've been involved with over the years have they have attorneys among their membership. They have CPAs or other professionals among their membership who may be able to step in and help.
Okay. Frank wants to know, if you're an ARES group, then do you have to create a sister organization whose purpose is to support the ARES mission?
No. I mean, your organization is there to provide this public service, and the exemption goes with the activity. I mean, and the exemption is driven by the kinds of activity that the organization incorporates in. So no, you don't want to separate. You want to keep the exempt activities within the confines of the corporate entity.
Okay. And Tom said that they incorporated it as the local Skywarn support group, and they were able to accomplish it.
Excellent.
Does anyone know, okay, this is another one from Dan. Does anyone know the percentage of amateur radio operators who are CPAs or tax-related attorneys? Section by section, we could collaborate to make up for ARL's locally oriented ARES entities. I don't know. I wouldn't have any idea. It's probably
I wouldn't. However, one of the things you should do is take a look at the on the ARL website. They have what's called a volunteer council program, and the primary reason for that normally had been originally was, I think, for amateurs who had tower and antenna issues. They could get at least a free initial consult with their local volunteer council. But I know there was at least one volunteer council used to, I don't know if he's still involved with the program, who was a then what we called Big 8 CPA firm tax attorney specializing in nonprofits. So take a look and see who volunteer council are. If they are themselves are not involved with nonprofit or tax work, they may be able to steer you to somebody who is.
Okay. And there is a lot of grant money out there. You need to be able to know someone that knows how to properly write the grants. The amateur radio group that owned a lot of internet addresses when they first formed the internet, this one group got assigned a whole bunch of the public addresses for amateur radio use. They sold a whole bunch of these addresses, and they now have a huge endowment.
Right, you're talking about ARDC, that's Amateur Radio Digital Corporation, and right. I'm glad you brought that up. I said earlier I would talk a little bit about some of the organizations I know. The ARL, of course, has its own ARL Foundation. Originally, that was to fund projects, mainly space and satellite projects and so on. It morphed to where the bulk of their activities is managing scholarships that are set up by family members and clubs in memory of someone or somebody who simply wants to set up a scholarship. But the ARL Foundation does have a granting arm. You can take a look at that. I happen to be a director of the YASME Foundation. We are one of those private foundations that has to expend a certain portion of our assets every year. And we get various grant requests, and we're also out actively looking for projects to help fund. Some of the things we've done in the past are providing travel expenses for kids from who have a technical interest but are from underserved countries to attend like the Youth on the Air activities in Region 1. We may help some of the kids from Africa get to that and participate by covering those expenses. We've been helping fund a number of the reverse beacon nodes. Those of you who are familiar with the reverse beacon network. We've been looking at areas of the world that don't have coverage, and we actually got a grant from ARDC ourselves to do that sort of thing. So we help provide some funding for the 5 and 10 program, the ground station program that Michelle W5NYV is heading up. So those, our foundation, and by the way, ARDC is also, because they got their money from a single source, basically, which is the sale of IP4 addresses. They are also a private foundation, and so they also have a required distribution every year for their charitable purposes. And in fact, I just got, I took part last couple months ago in a webinar that ARDC held for grant recipients, of which YASME was one, because we took that money and used it again for RBN and so on. And there were some really good, good projects that they had funded, but they're going to be ramping it up, and they are looking actively for projects. I can, if you go to the AREDC website, you'll see that they have, they're looking for projects right now. They've kind of set it up so that part of the year they're going to be focusing on amateur radio related projects. Part of the year they're going to be focusing on internet and public access types of projects. Their big thing is open source. When you look at these organizations, see what they're trying to accomplish, it could be really helpful, and this came through in the discussions that took place during this ARDC grantee conference. They're looking to see what benefits came from this to their community and the extent to which other elements of the community chipped in and participated. If they're the only ones writing checks and everybody else is just sitting there enjoying it, that's less likely to be attractive to a to a grantor than, hey, we got 20% of our money from here, 15% we just sweated and tried to raise it from various places. We're still short X percent and to finish, and that can be compelling because other parts of the community are also chipping in. So if they're helping get something finished that the community started, that's a real plus. The other thing is, when you're going to apply for a grant, don't just focus on stuff. I mean, it's like, hey, we need a van, we need an amplifier, we need this and that. No. You focus on what your objective is. What are you trying to do? What service are you trying to provide? How are you trying to improve your community or amateur radio or whatever it may be? And this activity requires these assets, and we've already managed to marshal assets A, B, and C, but we don't have enough ability to fund on our own D&E, and we've gone to these sources, and so this is what we got left that we need to fund. Now they're contributing to a project, an activity, rather than just writing a check to some organization and buying stuff. That makes sense?
Mm-hmm. Let's see. I guess Tom has his hand up, Dan?
Yes, I saw about it. You done it in the text for a little bit?
For a little bit, yes.
Okay, let's pick up Tom. Tom, go ahead and take it.
Thank you. We have a past history here in the Washington metropolitan area where the ARES people from all around the metropolitan area found the Washington Metropolitan ARES Council. And it took several years, but the league finally did catch up to their existence and firmly and without much fanfare, but firmly told them to disband and stop using the ARES name. And a lot of effort went right out the window. And it wasn't, this isn't a rumor. I can connect you with the people that were involved.
I don't doubt you.
The league told them in no uncertain terms You can't do that. Part of the sensitivity might have been that we're in Washington metropolitan area, which is the seat of the national government, and they were concerned about confusion between themselves and the council. I don't know. I don't know the underlying cause, but they said, look, that name is ours. You can't use it. Disband that thing right now. And so that's what they had to do. And they'd done a lot of good work. It was all involved in coordinating our activities within the Council of Governments, which is very important in the Washington metropolitan area, less so some other places. But many major urban areas have a Council of Governments, and if you want to fit in with them, you got to find a way to do it. So,
Let me ask a question on that. Did this council include ARES activities from multiple sections?
yes, it did.
I would assume it did. And I'm wondering whether the objection might have stemmed from the mandate within the ARES programs run by the league that ARES is basically managed by the elected section manager. And they might have seen this council as basically taking over some of the authority or responsibility that the league's own program says belongs with the section manager and his and her appointees.
Well, I
Just a
don't.
guess.
I don't know if that's the reason, because the ECs of both the Virginia and Maryland DC section were very active in the council. So if one of them was the complainant, they sure hit it really well. This is years ago now.
Yeah,
So
well, I'm not saying they would have complained, but the league may have said, hey, this kind of undermines the objective of having each of these things run locally. It's so important that it run locally that if it appears that there's some umbrella organization that encompasses multiple sections, that's kind of contrary to our original intent in forming the ARES program.
yeah, it could be. I don't know, but there are an awful lot of section boundaries that cross through major metropolitan areas. And, to provide an effective program in a major metropolitan area, you've got to get together with the other players, and that may cross a section boundary. So maybe
and we have the same thing out here in Southern California. I mean, we've got one section that is only one county. And I think it's the only one in the country that way. And then we have others that cover huge swaths of, the largest couple of counties in the United States geographically are part of one section. But physically, they're isolated from the main area where the section is run, and they're also adjacent to, or they work cooperatively with other sections. For example, we have the Orange section goes up into the Eastern Sierras, and the Eastern Sierras are right next to Western Nevada. And some years ago, I had the section manager, section emergency coordinator contacting me and asking, is it okay for us to work with the folks in your Orange section? I said, absolutely. I mean, these jurisdictional boundaries are not meant to prevent people from providing mutual support. I see Dennis W6DQ and Lisa on here. Dennis is up in eastern Kern County with the rest of Kern County separated by only the largest mountain range in North America. And they are actually physically closer in terms of travel to the Antelope Valley section of Los Angeles ARES. And they work together cooperatively, and there's absolutely nothing that prevents that cooperation. And I'm just wondering whether it was this formal kind of what might appear to be an oversight organization that might have caused the problem, because ARES groups do cooperate, among themselves. I've seen it here; it works well. It doesn't bother anybody.
Yeah, our problem was that the Council of Governments didn't want to deal with separate entities, and the council was only meant to be a coordinating organization, nothing more, to help the two sections coordinate. But for whatever reason, the point is that if the league doesn't like what you're doing, they can tell you to stop, and you have to stop.
Yeah, they can. I can't tell you, where they're going here either, because there've been so many changes back in Newington. But again, I think the thrust is if you can help accomplish the ARES mission, and you're not running, if you're not running directly counter to the program as defined by the league, and occasionally redefined, then you should be okay. Again, I can't tell you what the league's going to do, but we've been going for, they say, 15 plus years, and we've had no issue. And I know our director and some other directors are aware of it. And we try to. It's hard enough. I'll tell you, it's hard enough to get volunteers, especially in the leadership position. You folks all know that, I'm sure. So if you're resource starved, that can make it even less attractive to get involved and try to manage this stuff and grow it and build it and be of real public service.
I put the links for the grants for the ARDC in the chat.
Thank you very much, Barry.
Hey, I don't see more hands. How
And
about
there's nothing else in the chat.
Look at that. We're going to let you off the hook there, Marty.
All right, very good. Well, listen, this has been enjoyable, and again, I hope that you get something useful out of this, and that your own organization is, has the resources to thrive. And I'll tell you, if you do manage to, take the plunge and get yourself set up as a as a public charity or whatever, you'll start to think about, hey, your possibilities are opened up, the horizons are opened up. You may start thinking bigger about what could we accomplish, what could we do. But even our auxiliary communication service, or ACS group, that I am involved with, the training officer, we're basically we work for the emergency management department of the city of LA. But our ACS group has been able to get funding through the city to help put up some commercial mesh networks that will help alert people in certain canyon areas where they have very poor communications when you have a fire danger. So, again, find out what the worry buttons are for your local jurisdictions as well as for your served agencies, and think about projects you might undertake with some help and some funding. And our ACS is not incorporated. We're just basically a volunteer arm, actually managed by the LA City Fire Department. But we were able to get that funding, and it was substantial. It was six figures to help make this happen. So, think big and go talk to the folks that are benefiting from all your good work, and see if you guys can come up with something that will make everybody happy and make the world a better place.
I don't know where I got it, but I call that getting out of your 9 dots.
I'm sorry, Dan?
I said, I don't know where I picked up the saying from, but I've been calling that getting out of your 9 dots. But get out of your box. After you get to this point, go to that point. See what you can accomplish.
There you go. Okay, if nothing else, I will say 7-3, and thanks all for the chat. Good to see so many of you, and thank you for taking the time with me.
When you wiggled your headphone wire, you're sending with all kinds of static. It sounds like a bad connection at your.
Okay, I will try to troubleshoot that. Another thing to do.
A little bit of sandpaper on the plug or whatever might help. Who knows? All right.
Looks like we're good.
Yes.
Okay, 7-3 all. Take care.
Appreciate it very much. Anybody got anything else they want to say before we pull the plug?
Say thank you to Marty for a great presentation.
Yes.
Good to see you.
Hey, Barry,
Yes.
did you say you've got a template for a Florida organization for 501c3?
I don't have the template, but I do know where it is.
Okay. I'll drop you an email, see if we can't round that
Okay.
up, see if it's worth
Sure.
doing.
Sure.
All right.
I've had 2 groups do it. So I
Okay.
know, and one particular group went through a great deal of hell, I guess is the best way to say it. They had to take out 90% of their bylaws and redo them. Because if they wanted to become a 501c3, because Florida's 501c3 laws are really bizarre.
Well, I've got the Barra's a 501c3.
Yeah. Okay.
And this would be just starting out something like a Volusia.
Right.
ARES emergency response force or something just to create it from scratch.
Yeah, okay. Send me an email and I'll see what I can't get to you.
All righty. Thanks. Y'all have a good evening.
Okay, anybody else? Okay, I'll leave the thing, after I close it out, I'll leave it open. So if you want to come back and chat, whatever, feel free to do so. 73s, everyone. It's been a pleasure. It was another good meeting. And I keep wanting to say hi to Lisa over there. I think that's Dennis's co-pilot.
Yep.
It's Dennis's producer.
Oh,
That's it.
that works. All right. All right, everybody.
Thanks, Dan.
73s.
7-3, everybody. We'll see you later.
Good night, all. See you at all.